In this final video on section 1.5, we're looking at the quadratic formula, much beloved of all people who grew up in a Russian-speaking country, it seems, because it seems to be something that's taught very, very early there, and everyone in a Russian-speaking country seems to learn it. In any case, it looks like this, right? X equals negative b, and then plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now sometimes we write a shorter form of that, where the b squared minus 4ac is written as this little triangle, delta. Right? The Greek letter delta is b squared minus 4ac. And so we end up with this simpler kind of form of the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is actually just completing the square. If you complete the square, use the technique from completing the square from the previous video on this equation here, divide through by a, take half of the b over a that you end up with, square it, replace it. You can see this kind of building up, step, 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 and eventually you'll end up with these two answers down here. But we won't do that proof just now, you'll be glad to know. In example 7, down here, using the quadratic formula to solve x squared plus 2x minus 24, the key thing is to pick off what your a, your b, and your c are. Now, just to have a look up here, the a is the number that multiplies the x squared, the b is the number that multiplies the x, and the c is the number that's all by itself, that's not a coefficient of x. So, in this quadratic formula down here, coefficient of x squared is just 1, so a is 1. Coefficient of x is 2, so b is 2. And the other number is negative 24, so that's c. The discriminant there then is going to be b squared minus 4ac, so that's 2 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 24. That's written down here, that when you do that calculation, that gives you 100. And then if you substitute into these two equations here, you'll get the negative 2, which is our negative b, negative 2, plus or minus the square root of 100, that's the same as negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10, all divided by 2. So you end up with those two possible answers, which should give you, in the end, x equals 4 or x equals negative 6. In example 8, it's a very, very similar process. The a in this example is 3, the b is 4, and the c is negative 6. And it's really just about plugging those values into the equation. The delta, b squared minus 4ac, is equal to b squared minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 6. Calculate that, that gives you 88. Not such a nice number now, because the square root of 88 is not very nice. But then when you plug it into this equation here, the x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of delta, square root of 88 in this example. Okay, it's not very nice. We'll get decimals rather than nice numbers. But these are the numbers we should get. And we'll have a look at this last page. We call these solutions we get. We got two solutions for each of the previous answers. We sometimes call them roots. Right in here, we say roots are also called solutions or zeros. It's the discriminant, that delta thing, the b squared minus 4ac, that can tell us whether we're going to have 0 solutions, 1 solution, or 2 solutions. If the discriminant is negative, then we're trying to do the square root of a negative number, and that's not going to work. Right? Remember the quadratic formula? had the square root of b squared minus 4ac in it. So if b squared minus 4ac is negative, we get 0 solutions. If, however, it's equal to 0, then what we're going to have is negative b plus or minus square root of 0. That's just going to be 0 added on to the negative b, so we end up with just this one solution here. And then if it's positive, that's like the two examples we've already done, then we get these two different answers here. So, in example 9, again, it's very, very straightforward. Can we solve an equation like this? Are there two solutions, one solution, however many solutions? Well, you don't even need to solve it to know how many solutions there are going to be. If a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 6, and c is equal to, well, it should be 12 there. When we do the calculation, the discriminant is equal to b squared minus 4ac, 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 12. That's 36 minus 48, that's a negative number. And then since negative 12 is less than 0, it's a negative number, we can't do the square root of a negative. So the equation doesn't have any real solutions. No real solutions, but in a future section of the course we will see that there are things called imaginary or complex numbers, and there are solutions if we include those imaginary or complex numbers. But for now, we just say there are no real roots if the discriminant is negative.